This is Jilliana Ranicar-Breese, and I'm still, this is part 2, and I'm still with Andrew Kluwer, the psychic poet. Andrew, tell me how you started or you realised that you were psychic. Because you tell me it was, in fact, in your 30s.
Yeah, I was psychic from being a young boy. I saw ghosts and I've written down my ghost stories. But in my 30s, I met up with my family in Scotland, and my Auntie Dinah, she could tell the fortunes with the Gypsy's Cross. You know, she's off the Stuarts and Robertsons and off the traveller side of life. And she said I had the gift, but I mustn't force it.
Right.
So I didn't go by
did
books.
Did she initiate you, or did you have an epiphany?
She asked me to read the fortunes.
Yes.
Of the family, which I did.
From what kind of cards?
Not cards, from the hand. I'm a palmist.
Oh, right, palmist, yes.
I'm a palmist, and here I have, this is a crystal.
Yes.
And if you hold it in your hand, the crystal enlarges the lines on the hand.
Oh, yes.
And it helps you read a person's face and hands, because my brand of fortune telling is the folklore of the face and hands.
Right. What do you see in my face?
I see somebody who's very astute, who doesn't take fools gladly.
And what about my palms? You read my palms last time.
I did.
I'm going to live for a long time, apparently.
And you've got good fortune coming to you.
Oh, that's good.
Now, my aunt would never tell anybody if she saw death.
No, I know that's a rule. I know that.
Well, she did that, and my great aunt was called Christina, and they called her Black Teen because she had very dark eyes, and she was a very good fortune teller. But mainly did that over in Australia, because most of the family emigrated between the wars because of the work situation in Scotland.
Right. So anyway, you're in email contact with
my family in Australia.
Yeah.
And I visited
So
them
tell me some of these ghost stories.
Well, I can tell you one from Aberdeen if you like to hear it. I don't know if you're familiar with Aberdeen, but
no, I've never been.
Well, Aberdeen is called the Granite City.
Right.
And it's got a very large harbour. It's very well known through the oil industry now. But in the old days, it was a university town, quite a wealthy town in its own right.
Right.
Now, there's the North Sea at Aberdeen, and you have the rivers Don and Dee.
Yeah, we've got to make this quite short, Andrew.
I know. This part of the story is about the Broad Hill in Aberdeen, which lies between the rivers Don and Dee. Okay. Now, the Broad Hill is a sand hill, and it's near the tenement land of Aberdeen, which is a tenement housing. Now, I used to live there, and I would go and practice my folk singing on the hill, not to disturb people. And one day I was there, and I saw this very tall lady standing at the matriculation point at the top of the hill. And I thought, well, I don't want to embarrass her through my singing. She was wearing a long black cloak and her very, very pale face. And I thought, well, she might be an art student. Right. Oh, then, she was young, was she? She was, I would say in her 20s. Okay. But, she was, I could see her definitely there. Her face was in shadow. Suddenly, I saw her begin to move, and I couldn't believe it. The hill is covered with marram grass, and she started to walk away from the top of the hill, and she was gliding. She was gliding about 18 inches above the surface of the hill. And I saw her going downhill, and for a minute she was out of sight. And I looked, I thought, something's wrong here, because it felt like I was in a time capsule. It was sunset time, street lights were beginning to come on. It was a magical feeling. Anyway, she disappeared without trace. I went later on to research about the Broad Hill, and I found out there had been a plague pit there where they'd buried a lot of people who had suffered death with the plague. So this mysterious lady was one of them.
Ah, right. Well, what can I say? And you got another one?
Well, yes, I've got one from England.
Okay, right. Let's have it.
I am by profession a librarian, and I was working on a contract for the Ford Research and Engineering Centre in Basildon.
Yeah.
And what happened, due to recession, the job was suspended, and I was told, hold on, get a local job, see if we can get you back working again. Okay. Anyway, I went night cleaning, and these were the workshops where they did all the experiments. Well, I was using my cleaner in the early hours of the morning while the men were having about a couple of hours rest, and the place was absolutely silent. I suddenly saw a man coming in a white overall. He was in a rush, and I stepped aside to let him go past. Then suddenly he disappeared, and I thought, my goodness me, what is the reason for this? And I reported this to my supervisor, and he said there was a death in one of the experimental workshops, a pit. Somebody died there, and they'll never ever have a person work on their own in that situation again because of this sudden death. And that's he said, you're not the only person to have seen this.
And how did the person die?
Well, it was you know, an inspection pit, and obviously something crashed down on him.
Oh.
A nasty, horrible death, apparently.
Oh, yeah, right. Okay, well.
So that's an industrial ghost story.
Yes.
I've got another one if you want.
How many minutes? We're on 7 minutes.
We very shortly.
Okay, go on.
I continued to work to get casual work, and I worked for the Co-op Distribution Centre. And there was a young lad in England, in the same town.
Yeah.
And there was a young lad there who was I knew, and he asked me to read his fortune, which I did.
Yes.
He subsequently left, and I heard that he had died. Well, one day I was in the factory and I was just about to go for my break, and I suddenly felt a pinprick in the back of my neck.
Yeah.
I turned around and I saw him standing there, and I thought, you're not meant to be here, And he smiled at me. Then he slowly faded into the background.
Oh my God!
And I was told.
Was he an ectoplasm or something?
Well, they said that they'd heard picking trucks, with nobody on them, going around, and his brother still worked at the Co-op, and he got to hear about it, and they said what I said was true. He was an unquiet spirit.
He was a what?
An unquiet spirit, because he'd committed suicide. He'd got under a car, and the fumes killed him.
Oh, gosh. Well, Andrew, thank you very much for telling me your ghost stories. I know you've written about them, so have you seen any ghosts recently? These are all ghosts that you've seen quite a while ago.
There was, as I said, I haven't seen my late wife Anne as a ghost, but I've felt her presence, and I felt a cushion to press beside me, and a lady that I was speaking to, who happened to be a spiritualist, told me that it was her, and she didn't want me to be sad. That was the message from her.
Okay, well, thank you very much. It's been delightful being with you, Andrew. Bye-bye.